Hello, Joan.
Hi.
This is Joan Bordow. Joan is a very, very good friend of mine. In fact, she's a very good friend of a lot of people. A lot of people experience her as beyond a good friend. Um, and I've known you. I mean, I think I've officially known you since I think probably around 2000, since like 2000 or so, right? And at first, I knew of you, or I knew you as people knew you in general, through and we'll be getting into this, but at the time you were a leader at Landmark, which is a transformational company that I'm sure we're going to go deep into, that was started by Warner Earhart. And we had just started circling, um, and we were doing these things called the Arte Experience, which is where circling, got most of its early development in. And you had connected, apparently, you tell the story that a lot of the people that took your courses came and did ours, and then ended up staying in ours, right? And you were really good friends with a lot of the students, and I knew you just basically on the periphery. And
Yeah.
when I really got to know you, I would say when I really met you was the person I started circling with, Jerry Candelaria. The two of you had started dating, and Jerry died a couple of years ago, and you were dating him at the time. And I was starting to like get to know you more at that time, but I wouldn't say I really, really knew you. And then when
Mhm.
Jerry died, I kind of had a sense, when I looked at you, I was like, I knew who Jerry was, and I knew the kinds of things that become possible when you meet Jerry, and I couldn't even imagine what it must have been like for you. And so I asked you, and I know that Jerry. I would imagine at first it had a lot to do with just knowing Jerry would want me to do that, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, within seconds, it went beyond, Jerry's friendship, right? And
Yeah.
you became very good friends over a very intense period of your life. I mean, so many things came into question for you, like so many deep foundational. I remember conversations that we had as you were processing the Jerry phenomena that had hit you, and everything connected with that. And of course, I'm
Yeah.
connected to that, and am very wedded to a lot of that ground, or where that comes from. And so I just kind of, in a certain sense, I just had this. I remember in my heart, I just had this instinct to just swoop you up and make sure you're okay. And of course, what I ended up finding out is, like, I ended up in a whole world. There's a whole world to you. And now you're so nestled into my world. There's my world, and then there's Joan, and they're kind of like, they're very similar worlds at this point. Yeah. So I feel
Yeah.
very grateful to you, and having you as my friend, and getting the opportunity just to share you like this.
I am so grateful for our relationship. I'm
Mm,
so grateful for our friendship.
mm,
It's very basic and foundational for me.
mm, mhm. Yeah.
You're my go-to person.
Right.
When I can't quite make sense of my reality,
Hmm.
there's a couple of people I go to. One is my spouse,
Hmm.
who I've been with for a million years, 47 years.
Hmm.
And the other person is you.
Hmm.
And when the problem is with my spouse, I definitely go to you.
Right. Yes. Totally. Totally. You know, you have such a colorful life. I think the most present thing that's going on is you just started basically writing about sex in a new magazine.
I did.
Tell me a little bit about this. Tell me a little bit about this what you're writing about, this last article, what the context of it was, and you're currently writing the current one that's going to go in the next edition or something, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's this new platform, and it's a platform that currently consists of an online magazine, which is gorgeous. And it's my friend Audrey's.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked if I'd write for her. And I said, oh, I'd love to write for you. What do you want me to write about? And she said, sex. And I thought, great, that would be great. And so the first article I wrote is about sex and aging, because I think that area has this very bad rap.
Right.
And I think people who are looking toward getting old, like maybe you start looking toward getting old when you're in your 40s.
Yep.
Like before that, especially for me, I didn't really think that was possible. Like, yeah, other people got old.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
But as far as me, and so I think when people are looking at aging, they think they're going to have to limit or forego their sexual expression, their sexual behavior. And I think that's also kind of institutionalized in certain cultures where it's understood you'll forego that.
Right.
Like at least in India, as India used to be, you know, you were a householder, but then you'd let that go and, you know, become a like spiritual student.
Right. So it's like,
Then,
so sex is something that you had or did given by a certain age or context, and then there was something that you could let go of and get rid of, or was supposed to get rid of, or not. So
you're supposed to be over it.
Right.
You know, you were supposed to have,
yeah.
you'd be over it. You'd have sown your wild oats and then move on to more important things. Of course, in other cultures, like the French culture, it isn't that way at all. But I think in the US in particular, there's a enormous puritanical streak that runs through not American, but US culture.
Right, right.
And it's exacerbated by a whole bunch of cliches about aging and sexuality. Like there's a cliche about the dirty old man, and there's a cliche about the horny old woman, and they're both like, like disgusting caricatures.
Yeah.
And you're afraid that you'll end up that way.
Right.
But it's an area, I think, where there's not much critical thinking.
Yeah, totally.
And so I like that area, and I think sexual expression just gets better. It gets better for me.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's ubiquitous and it gets better for everyone, but I think the part of sex that's biological as you age, there's certainly things that are issues, biological issues. You can do a whole bunch of stuff about those issues. What goes unquestioned to a great degree is the ontological, psychological stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, just something that you just, I think, posited, right, in the background about it, right? Which was you took it out of something that you have at a certain age to something that you could express better, is the word that you said as you got older.
Yes.
And that's probably not the, well, in fact, observationally, that's not the common view or understanding of sex. But what you're saying is that, and you even made a distinction from the biological, right? In fact, you said the biological is kind of the stuff you can do stuff specifically about
Yeah.
to address,
Yeah,
right?
no, probably not all of it, but a lot of it.
Yeah. But the
But that's not
ontological,
the, no, that's not the,
yeah,
I think, that's not the piece that damages people's futures.
right.
It's all of the imagining
Mm.
that you somehow deteriorate, like like your capacity for it deteriorates, and I don't
Mm.
I don't buy it. I
Totally.
mean, maybe
Okay.
at some point I'll buy it, but
Yeah.
I'm 76.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to buy that, I better buy it soon.
Right. Right.
Because,
What they say is biologically you'll have much more time to buy it, right? You probably, you're about halfway there, I'd say. You have, but so right there, there's I think what you're talking about is that there's what I heard you say basically is that that people have people have futures, right? And that they're imagined, and there's
yes,
an assumed cultural imagined future,
yes,
an almost certain kind of future called
yes,
when you
almost
get
certain.
old, you have less sex, right? Sex goes away, like you wither away. In fact, there's something about like if you were to do that when you're older, there's something disgusting about that, or something.
Yeah, something disgusting.
Yeah,
Maybe your development is arrested in certain ways, if you're interested in that.
yeah. And so,
Just a pack of agreed upon lies.
right. So you're just not like, so what, like a couple of things is like, one of the things that I would imagine what I'm hearing is that what you're writing about in the magazine is, and this is some writing you're going to be doing ongoingly, like if there's a commitment that you have to write, or
I do, because it's fun.
yeah.
If it stops being fun, I
You're not going
won't.
to do it. Yes, you're not going to do it. In fact, we all often joke. I'm like, seems like retirement's working out good for you. This is an example, right?
Yes, somewhat, I'd say, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So this thing about, so one of the things that your experience flies in the face of, right, is a whole cultural narrative about that. And so
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your experience. What is your experience as a 76-year-old woman? I mean, I know that you've been on a ride, right? What's some of the ride that you've been on? Like, what is your experience now as a 76 years old?
Well, that I have, one thing is the older I get, the more say I feel I have. Also, the older I get,
The more say you feel you have.
say, yeah,
Right.
I feel I have
Yeah.
about how I am going to respond
Mm.
to various stimuli in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So let me see what I want to draw out about that. The older I get, the less of a victim I am to my circumstances, and the less irresponsible I am. And by responsible, I mean actually taking on, inventing for myself that I am cause in the matter of my life, while I'm not necessarily cause in the matter of my situations that I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
I am cause and the matter of how I react, respond to them. So,
Right.
so that makes everything better.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes everything easier. That makes everything more peaceful. And one of the things that makes better is sex.
Mm.
Like if I'm turning myself off, I'm clear no one else is turning me off. Nobody else is doing that to me.
Right.
That's on me,
Mm-hmm.
and it's fine. It's a possible way to be is turned off.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, being turned on and hot, that's on me too, and I can do that if I want.
Right.
I have say over my sexuality.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that I'm turned on all the time, but I have say, and I could be. And this is coming from someone who is really good at blaming other people and situations for why things are why the fuck they are.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's a good
So this is a
capacity to have.
yeah. So this is a turnaround from a place that you came from at one point, right? So this sense of
Yes.
just what you're saying, it goes back actually to what you just said about aging, right? There's a situation called aging, right, that has certain biological things that go on, and you can make choices about that. And there's a situation called aging. No one's able to like tap that code yet. They're working on it, but but then there's your response to what's happening, and what you're making. What I heard you say is that you're not coming from the place. Well, I understand that you've trained yourself to not come from the place, practice not coming from the place of
A lot of practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Age for you isn't you're not a victim to being 76. Right. Yeah. It's like
well, I do notice other people have a reaction to that. Like, I think when I was in my 60s, a lot of times I didn't lie about my age, but it was like a sin of omission.
Right.
I just didn't talk about it, and I let people assume whatever they were going to assume about how old I was, because I felt as soon as I said how old I am, then people are captive of certain pictures and images, and like they stop relating to what's there right now and fill in all the blanks with bullshit.
Yeah, totally. And so you haven't really been one to announce your age.
Well, lately, I mean, I think I did when I became 69 or 70. Because I saw that there was a certain percentage of people, usually women, almost entirely women, maybe entirely women, who saw some future for themselves in that. And I like providing that. I like people having more freedom and more possibility. And more joy and more happiness, rather than, God. Yeah.
Well, I think right there, I mean, this is one of the things I've always appreciated about you, and I just heard it in just what you just said, right? Which is you've been you're actually tracking and responding to a whole culture. Like, I like people knowing that they can be, basically you break a lot of molds. And so, like, there was a point where you didn't talk about your age because there was all kinds of baggage that people put you in. But then you got to a certain age where it's like you were really clear that there were all kinds of constraints about this age, right?
Yeah.
And so you're not living in them, right? You're not just swallowing them.
Well, except like, like I can see myself in the Zoom now. And I could see these lines and you know, so there are certain things.
Yeah, so
But
certain beautiful things, I think. Yes. Yeah. What is that part of it like for you?
um, well, I've traded on that for, you know, probably my entire life, like how I look.
Right.
So I have
You said you traded on that?
traded,
Uh-huh.
yeah, on like how I look. Actually, there was a little time when I was so embedded in being a hippie
Huh.
that I didn't. Like I
Yeah.
gave, but then I did again.
Yeah.
So I have attachments in that area. Like I think I'll have brown hair till I die. I don't
Right.
think I'm ever going to do the going gray route.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
Right.
I think
Totally.
people, friends of mine who do, I think, oh my God, courage,
Yeah.
what courage that takes. But
Yeah.
it's, you know, you make your choices in life.
Totally. Totally. Well, you know, I think the thing about you, Joan, is that there's not too many people that I encounter that know you that don't have I don't hear the word hot about you come to mind. There's something very hot about you, right? And that there's something in what's hot about you, right? It's interesting because as you get older, right, hotness is still shining through you. It's not. It's like
Yeah, what is that?
I know. That's a good question. I
Because
would.
I mean,
What is that
I
exactly?
like that. I like being the recipient of things like that,
Yeah.
but I'm not like after that.
Yeah.
It's not like I don't wake up and think, oh, how am I going to be hot today?
Hmm.
No.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But what is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you think it is? I would imagine it has something to do with whatever it is that notices it and asks that question. What is that?
Well, I don't know. I think it has something to do with authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think so. You know,
Yeah. And what in for you, I know there's a deep. So there's. What do you mean by authenticity?
I think a capacity that can be developed
Uh-huh.
where you like call yourself on your shit.
Right. Right.
I think that's the main piece. It's
Yeah.
the
Huh.
and then and for me in the calling myself on shit. I mean, and I don't think I ever do it immediately,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm pretty much count onable for at some point being in so much pain that I'll go, oh God, all
Right.
right, I'm gonna just say it. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna say how it is for me.
Yeah. Say
And
how it is.
in that, I can see if there's things I want to do about it.
Mm.
Like,
Mm.
you know, like having so much attention on myself. Like,
Mhm.
do I really do I really want to pay so much attention to myself at the expense of other people?
Mhm.
I don't think so. And
Right.
then I can do something about it, but I
Yeah.
can't and when it's a big secret.
Yeah.
And I'm a bad, terrible person for being obsessed.
Right. Right. Totally. So there's a part of it which is being authentic. What I'm hearing, a big part of it is this willingness that you have. Part of authenticity is calling yourself on. Is it fair to say all of your inauthenticities?
Yeah, you can absolutely say that. And the other thing is, it's never fun.
Mhm.
It isn't like, oh, good, here's an opportunity
Right.
to point to this inauthenticity. No, it always looks like, don't do that.
Yeah.
They won't like you. They won't accept you. They'll know what a bad person you are. They'll know what a big jerk you are, and then they'll kick you out of the club, whatever the club is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example,
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of writing the second article for the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about it takes place with me as like in my late teens, early 20s, and I've discovered sex as a commodity, like a power, like a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
Like I discover, I could even have sex with JFK. You know, if you are strategic enough and you're a woman and you've kind of learned some sexual tricks, you could have sex with anyone, and thereby, given the culture now, given women don't have much power in the 60s, that is a pathway to having some power.
Right.
And for me, that was dangerous. There's something dangerous about writing about that, because I do not consider myself a victim of that.
Right.
I consider lived inside of a particular paradigm. There were constraints and limitations, like there always are, inside of any context or paradigm.
Right.
And I figured out how to get some power. It's I think, a kind of unpopular thing to say now. On the other hand, it really describes something that was very true for me then. And, you know, will I be kicked out of the club, like the Me Too club?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
If I really get into writing about that stuff.
Totally. And what the sense of risk, right? Which is, so what I'm hearing actually is that this is authentic. We we're starting to talk about what is it that makes you hot? Because you don't wake up in the morning and have this imperative, like, I'm going to be hot and put your makeup on. But there's something that shines through, right? That even like in all the things that you're noticing about aging, there's something about it that like shines. It shines through. It animates it in some way for me, and I think for a lot of people. And just to see some context, that for a lot of people, you have led courses for years, and landmark and different kinds of things, and other spiritual organizations and stuff like that. And we could probably talk about a lot of that history. But what I'm kind of getting is that when we asked, what was it about? What is that? Right?
What is that?
I've never really asked that question about hotness before. But there is something where, and then you said, well, I think it has something to do with, I call myself out on my shit, right? You can count on me pretty much to notice where I'm like inauthentic, basically. And you share about it, or you talk about it. In fact, it's the last thing that you want to do, right?
Yeah.
But then you do it.
Yeah.
Right? And then something happens out of that.
Yeah.
And one of the places that you're noticing that you may be doing that now is when someone came to you and asked you to write about sex at 76 years old, what you find yourself writing about, right, is a way in which, for you as a woman at that time, a way to get power, right, you found out was through sex. And one of the things that you notice that's scary about this, and maybe like points to the authenticity, the act of authenticity, is that you're risking something. And I think what I heard you say is that there's something about that you don't see yourself as a victim in that, right? That you sense is speaking into something that could have some blowback, or yeah,
like, oh, you're in denial
Mhm.
because it was really bad at that time, and yeah, there were limitations.
Right.
Um, there were, and I like it better now, but uh, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Oh, what is it that, I mean, how did you go about learning that? Like, what was the ride like?
Well,
First of all, actually, where did you grow? You grew up in New York, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I was
Tell us a little bit about, like,
born in Brooklyn,
yeah.
middle class, upwardly mobile Jewish family.
Uh-huh.
And when I was 10, we moved to a very upwardly mobile part of Long Island
Uh-huh.
called the Five Towns.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I was I never considered myself a Jewish princess, but I probably was.
Uh-huh.
I had friends who I definitely would consider as Jewish princesses
Yeah.
because they were richer than my
Right.
family.
Right. Right. Just so I know, because I'm not that familiar with Jewish princesses. Like, I know that I've obviously heard the name, but what's a Jewish princess basically supposed to be like?
Spoiled rotten.
Okay. Okay, got it. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And you had a sister too, right?
An older sister, 4 years older.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was some kind of dynamic, as there are in all
Yeah,
families.
well, she was who I wanted to be.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
she, as a young child, she could do things I couldn't do, and I wanted to be her. And she was an artist, and I wanted to be an artist, but she was such a good artist. I knew I could never be an artist. So there was a lot of my identity I defined by virtue of not being my sister.
Right. Right. Okay, got it.
But eventually, she ended up in the camp with my parents, and I ended up on the other side of that cultural gap, which was called the generation gap, which wasn't so much, it was generational, but it was more where your head was
Yeah. Yeah.
than your exact age.
Right.
So like Ram Dass, who was a few years older than me, I mean, he was definitely on the side of the gap that I was on.
That's the side of the gap that you
And
ended up on.
Tim Leary,
Yes.
a bunch of years older than me, but definitely.
Right.
Definitely.
Right. Totally. Okay, got you. So you were your friends, and it sounds like your sister, right, were on one side of the camp.
Yep.
And then you ended up on the other side of the camp.
On the other side.
Right, which sounds like well, the 60s.
It was the 60s. Yeah.
Yeah. It was the 60s. And how did you, did you stay at home until you were like 18, and then did you go to college?
I went to college when I was 17.
When you're 17, okay, got it.
I was really young for my grade. And I went to college when I was 17, but found it was not to my liking. I went to Emerson College in Boston, and I wanted to be an actress. And I was excluded.
I don't think I knew that part.
Yeah.
I didn't know you wanted to be an actress.
I wanted to be an actress. And I was excluded from getting certain parts because I had a really, really thick, not just New York accent, I had a really thick Long Island accent, which to me is the most, when people think of New York accents, they are really talking about Long Island accents.
Right.
And then I fell in love with this guy who had just graduated college, and he was moving to New York, and I thought, I don't want to be here anymore, not getting parts. And, you know, I want to go there and be with him. So I came back home to my parents' house. They were very much against me quitting college.
Right, right.
And I started living at home again, which was just miserable. And he broke up with me like almost immediately, which was devastating because that was my way out.
Right.
And then I started hanging out in Manhattan. I started working in the city and hanging out and smoking lots of pot and taking amphetamine. I discovered amphetamine. That was like, wow. That was kind of wow, miraculous, horrible, miraculous.
Had you been introduced to psychedelics by that time?
No, not yet.
Okay.
That happened when I was 20. I took LSD for the first time.
Yeah, got you. And that was in New York.
Yeah.
So you're in New York.
Yeah.
And you started, like, you're smoking pot and you discovered amphetamines.
Yep.
And then how did you make your way through New York? What happened?
Different things happened. So the thing about, well, one thing that happened before that was my home life in terms of sexuality was super suppressive.
Right.
And, you know, my mother would say things. My mother was like very loving, really great, but she would say things like, "Don't embarrass me by getting a bad reputation."
Oh, no.
And you didn't get a bad reputation. In some households, maybe that would have meant getting bad grades.
Yeah, yeah.
So in my house, that meant having sexual intercourse.
Yeah.
That's what that meant. Bad reputation equaled screwing.
Right, right.
So I was very...
So you were being watched and you had like a ton of pressure from your parents and their image on the line connected to your sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah, like I thought, oh, if I have sex, I'm hurting my mother.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's weird, isn't it?
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Except I really wanted to have sex. I mean, I would like make
therefore you wanted to hurt your mother.
Therefore, I'm a bad person.
Yes.
I really wanted to. So my excuse for eventually having it, I think, was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Really?
Well, remember, you know, the Russians were sending arms to Cuba, and Kennedy took a stand.
And everyone was talking, this could be it.
This could be it.
Right.
So I thought, holy shit, this could be it. I'm not going to die a virgin.
Right. And besides that, if I'm not going to have a future, then I can have sex without hurting my mother.
Really, because none of us are going to have a future. So that's when I first had sex.
Wow.
I was 17.
Well, I just want to kind of just sink into that for a second. That's just, that one is crawl inside of that. Cause it's like, if I have, well, and I'm imagining there was a way where, if it's like most families, right, there's the explicit, right? There's a way where that was explicit, right? Like, your mother's saying, don't ruin my reputation. So there's an explicit, but I would imagine there's also the implicit structure and atmosphere that you just knew that you probably didn't even need to say it, I would imagine.
Yeah, that she said it only made it explicit because, you know, like people like Marilyn Monroe were considered like sexy and hot and whores.
Yeah.
Like she was considered a whore
Yeah.
for being sexy and hot.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I want to slow down on that for a second because it's interesting. I don't I discovered the analytics for videos. There's a whole button that you press, and there's like analytics that shows you the graph of the age range of the people that watch you and all this stuff. It's a whole
Wow.
and I just discovered that the age range of most of my viewers are, I think, between the age of 25 and 35, I think, right in that age.
Wow.
So I'm just imagining, and it's funny. I'm getting to the age where I'm noticing differences in sensibilities of generations. And I just heard a woman talk, and just younger woman, she's probably like early 20s, talk about friends with benefits, like, but without changing a beat, right? In the conversation, and I was like, that you like when I was really young, you would never hear a woman say that, right?
Yeah.
Like without it at least being a thing that she was saying, right?
Right.
So like what
Like
you're
making
talking
her
about,
a certain kind of person.
yeah.
Now it just makes her part of the mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like really, really what's possible, or the sensibility around relationships and around sexuality, especially with women, is very much changed. So just to
Very
get some
much changed,
perspective.
but I would say, very much changed by virtue of things like feminism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And probably psychedelics, because I think everything is very much changed by virtue of,
Right.
wider spread use of psychedelics.
Yeah, yeah. Which is something I want to dive into with you a bit, in your experience of that. But just that sense, I just want to kind of crawl inside of that, because I don't think, I would imagine like a lot of people really maybe don't even would have a hard time even comprehending this, but like literally, as a woman, as you, at that time in your life, right? Because it just wasn't in your family, that was in the culture too. You're just coming out of the 50s, right? Where the Norman Rockwell painting and appropriateness, it was so oppressive, right?
Yes.
Such that it just became implicit and self-evident that if you have sex, you could disgrace your entire lineage.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So like there's your biology and all of your biological impulses that are natural and to procreate and all the different things. And then there's a narrative and a pressure connected to your identity and all the things that informed your identity, so that you could, if you went with your biology, if you did what you wanted, or even what was in your heart, your whole family was on the line.
Yeah.
That is quite a predicament.
Yeah, and it's
Wow.
it's so anti-evolution, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's such an anti-evolutionary impulse or culture. It's
Right. Totally. So basically, it became okay for you to have sex once it looked like there was an almost certain guarantee that you could have sex without the consequences of ruining your family, because there was a future that called everyone's family would be gone, or there would be no one.
No one would know.
You were free to have sex.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Wow. And so you had sex.
Yeah.
Did it happen?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then, but then you've been having to deal.
Well, I didn't know the mechanics of it. The guy I had sex with, was like 18 and didn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun, but I was glad it was over with.
Right.
And then I sought to learn and perfect things and learn a bunch of things.
Right. Totally. And so when when no one died and you had a future, right? And I get this sense of like, so when you went to New York, that's when you you started living opposite of the way that you were raised.
I had started when I lived at home in high school.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the first time I smoked pot was like in the spring of my senior year. No one smoked pot. No, it wasn't a thing. Jazz musicians smoked pot.
Yeah, yeah.
Bohemians smoked pot.
Right.
Nobody, wasn't. And I smoked it then a little bit because you couldn't really get it.
Yeah.
But I was rebellious. I like would take the car, and my friends and I would just, drive hundreds of miles away, and then I would bring the car back, and my mother would say, did you take the car? Which of course had all this mileage on it now. And I'd say, why would you think I took your car?
Yeah, yeah.
Why would I do that?
Yeah, yeah. Totally, totally. So I think the thing it's funny because I don't think we've ever like our conversations go all over the map. So like going back to this and like really kind of chronologically going over your history, it's interesting. It gives me some insight, right?
Yeah.
About things ways you express yourself and things that you contend with and things you struggle with, and even the ways that you talk about being authentic, right, is one of the first things that came up for you, right? When we looked at the ontology of hotness, right, basically. What is hotness, right? Is that there's this thing about authenticity, which is sharing. One of the ways that you can be authentic is by sharing how you're not, and that there's a risk in that.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because I'm feeling the culture, right? The constraints you were born into had so many internal contradictions, right? And there's a side that it was really clear what you were supposed to do and supposed to be, and your sister was it, right?
Yeah.
And you wanted to be like your sister, so you wanted to be the sense of the ideal, right? Or
I had wanted to be, but at one point I just said, fuck it, because it's not happening.
yeah,
That's not going to happen. So then I became the Antichrist.
right. So just there, right? Like so your dreams were a dream of like, because when I try to imagine you being that, it just hurts. Right? The idea of you kind of like taking on and being whatever a princess is, and being my imagination of what all that is, I just can't, I can't see it. It's just something inside goes, that would just be so wrong.
Yeah.
However, there was a way in which your dreaming motivational systems were oriented towards that. That's what was the ideal.
Yeah.
And then of course, right, you're you. But this didn't have anything to do with you.
Yes.
And so you end up, as you grow up and as this becomes more this and you become more you, and you realize that you're not that, then you have to do this other move, right? Which is become not that. Like,
yes,
I am that I
yes,
am not that. So you became
which
the
is of course being
princess.
defined by that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can't be the not unless you bring along
Yeah.
the that.
Right. Totally. So and it's interesting because I think that's what a lot of people call authenticity. It seems to be. Is more like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Right. I hate that when people call that authenticity.
Right.
On the street, that's what passes for authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I think, some of the things about, like, a lot of that stuff has to do with victimhood, I believe.
Yeah.
right, which is like, that's bad and I'm good, and to pushing
Yeah.
back against that. But of course you're so dependent on not
Yes.
being that, right?
Yeah.
So one of the ways that I'm just getting of like what a freedom you must have found in copping to that whole thing going on inside of you, right? Of like, oh yeah, being honest about what I actually think, right? Is like, I actually just hate you because you're a good person, and but I want to be a good person, and like therefore I just want to hide my face and impress you or something. And you say it, right? You say it, and like there's something that releases in that that just seems existentially awakening or something like that. Something else
That
begins
really
to
didn't
unfold.
happen though till my early 50s.
Yeah. Okay. So
That though the roles I was in
yeah,
seemed to smack of authenticity.
yeah,
And while, because I was a writer, there were times when I would be able to uh, expose that in my writing, but in my everyday,
yeah,
on the court, as lived life,
right,
that was hidden.
right. Okay, got it. So writing, that's been a big part of your life. In fact, it's just recently come back.
Come back after 30 years,
Yeah,
40 years.
yeah. So you went to college. You wanted to be an actor,
Actress.
or
Yeah.
an actress. Then you came back, lived back at home, and then escaped to New York.
Yeah.
Had sex.
Yeah. Had a ton of sex.
Yeah, a ton of sex, right?
A ton of sex.
Which was also, it sounds like, was an introduction to a whole culture.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're right, like the introduction. Was that your first beat into spirituality in the 60s? That world, was that New York, or was that after New York, or
No, that it was in New York. I was about 22,
okay.
23. I read the autobiography of a yogi.
Okay.
I had already taken LSD,
Okay.
and then I read autobiography of a yogi.
Yeah. So you took LSD in your early 20s.
Yeah,
And was that a pivotal? Was that like a
yeah, complete,
demarcating line?
totally.
Huh.
Because it opened up
Yeah.
worlds that I never knew. I mean,
Huh.
it sounds so cliched, never knew existed, but it did.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Do you remember much about the experience that you had? Was it, or was it mostly like, was it so much about the experience,
For my
but like what the
first
experience
LSD
revealed?
experience wasn't like an experience of like unity with the cosmos. That came later. But I could see people's duplicity.
Yeah.
I could just see, oh, they're saying one thing,
Right.
but they're being something else.
Right.
It was like a superpower.
Huh.
It was like having a superpower. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like what's apparently on the surface isn't what's going on here at all.
Wow. So it's interesting because I just got this sense of on some level, up until that point, you, like, your life was kind of almost of and working out that tension
Yeah.
and being defined by that tension, right?
Yeah. Well, but I thought that I took it all personally,
Yeah.
being defined by that tension.
You
Like,
were,
this is just me.
yeah, totally.
This isn't a human experience. This is just personal.
Right, totally. And so something about when you took acid or LSD, that background became foreground.
Yeah.
And you could almost like, yeah, get the sense of like seeing the matrix of it.
Yes.
Yeah, that seems like a game changer.
Yeah, it was completely.
Yeah, that is a game changer. It's also, I mean, if you think about it, like with, you know, a lot, I mean, a lot of people write about this. The one that I know of that initially wrote about this in a psychological way was Piaget, where he talked about development, right? Is that you, is that you see with the level of development that you're at. You don't see it. And then at a certain point, the level that you're at starts to, as you start to grow in it, or it becomes more complicated, and you start to have all these dichotomies. And that if things go well, it's not given that it'll go like this, but if things go well in some way, there's a certain point where you pop out, and the level that you were seeing with becomes the level that you were seeing, and you're now at a higher level of complexity. And then the
Yeah,
next level is about kind of, you could say, you know, integrating that level into this new level of complexity until another level of that happens again. So I really got the sense of yeah, you were in all of that. You had all those contradictions and all those inauthenticities, and were in response to it in your family, right, and in yourself. And so you were of it. I would imagine your fears and your self-talk and all of the things were trying on some level to work that out, but embedded in it. And so LSD had this experience of where you could see the matrix of it.
yeah,
Wow. Wow. And so then you opened your eyes and you looked around, and you're now in the in this situationally, you're in the same world, but you're in a very different world.
yeah.
And is that when you started to write?
I had always written. I had always written. That was my fallback if I couldn't be an actress.
Hmm.
That was,
Hmm.
I mean, the actress thing, I think the writing thing was like always the very basic mode of self-expression for me.
Mhm.
But the actress thing was all about being famous.
Right. Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it
Interesting.
wasn't like a mode of self-expression,
Yeah. But writing was.
but writing was.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, you even talked a little bit about that there was yeah, you were starting to push the edges with your writing. Like you could say
Yeah,
stuff in your writing that were really true and authentic,
yeah,
but then your interactions in the world, it's not like you were that person in the world in your experience.
right.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't that person.
Yeah. And because I know that you have written, how many books have you written actually?
8. But,
8.
um, you know, and they were all nonfiction
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of how-to stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
how I ended up writing my first book was I worked for a small publishing company in Manhattan,
Mm-hmm.
and my boss was the president, and I was his assistant,
Mm-hmm.
and I was discovering yoga at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and I had become a vegetarian.
And this is like around what year?
64,
Okay,
maybe.
so early mid 60s, yeah.
Yeah, and I a couple of times I invited him over. I had a loft. I invited him over and I made him vegetarian food. And then he quit the publishing company and became a literary agent. And he asked me if I wanted to write a vegetarian cookbook,
Hmm.
and that, you know, he thought that that was a really great idea. And he coached me on how to write a book proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And he sold the book to Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston,
Mm.
which is a major,
It's a
big
major
major
thing.
publishing company.
Yeah.
And they gave me $2,000, which is to me at the time like $2 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I wrote this cookbook called Victory Through Vegetables.
Of course you did. Victory through vegetables, right?
and it became very, very popular.
Yeah.
And it went to paperback and then small paperback, and the rights were sold to several countries, and it was excerpted in some magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And then, quite surprisingly, publishing companies would come to my agent, my ex-boss, and say, well, what is, my name at the time was Joan Weiner, because I was married then to Richie Weiner.
Mm-hmm.
What does Joan Weiner want to write now? Because I was a hippie, and that was a thing then.
Yeah.
and I would make up what I wanted to write about, and then somebody would buy it.
Huh.
And that happened for a long time.
Wow. Wow.
So the books that I wrote in that time that were not like Victory Through Vegetables or the illustrated hassle-free make your own clothes book or the biography of Swami Satchidananda were a book called A Motherhood Book, which was about my experience of pregnancy and early motherhood. And then I wrote a book called The Ultimate Loss, which was about what happens for parents when a child dies. And they were the most literary.
Right. Oh, wow. So when you, because I know at some point you, well, did you write that autobiography for the yogi that you?
Swami Satchidananda's biography. Yeah.
So when did you, and you became part of that whole?
Well, I was his
culture,
secretary. I moved in with him to the what was the Integral Yoga Institute on West End Avenue in Manhattan.
Right. And who
I had
was
met
he?
him. He was a master of reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was one of the first wave of teachers who came to the U.S. in the 60s. So he came, Suzuki Roshi, who started the Zen Center in San Francisco, was here. Yogi Bhajan, who was a Sikh teacher, was here. Swami Bhaktivedanta, who started the Hare Krishna thing, was here. They're all, they're all here, and they're all kind of hanging out together. I mean, there were times when they'd actually hang out together, and I met Swami Satchidananda very soon after he had come to the U.S. And he asked me if I would be his secretary, and I said, yeah. And I, moved in to the Integral Yoga Institute, which is this big, big apartment. And I told my husband I was doing that, and I said, you can come or not. And he would sometimes be there, but he had a head shop in the Lower East Side called the Electric Lotus.
Just so I know, how is your mom narrating your life at this point, if they knew about it?
But they knew certain things. There were things they couldn't escape knowing.
Right.
She was like, her narrative, well, Joan is just different.
Right. Okay, got it. Okay, got it.
And by then I had a yogi name. I was Sita.
Shita.
Sita.
Theta.
S-I-T-A.
Wow.
Sita.
Wow. So what was it like? So tell me a little bit about how did you get from, so here you are in the early mid 60s, right? This is I mean, you're talking about stuff that's like changed culture, right? You're talking about people and things that when people talk about this, they talk about like this being the beginning of a whole new wave of consciousness, the whole
Yes.
essentially. So you're in New York at that time and find yourself in the middle of all that, but not only in the middle of all that, you find yourself with one of the prophets of it.
Yeah. He was, if you ever see the movie of Woodstock, he was the Swami who opened up the Woodstock Festival.
Of course you were his secretary. Wow. Wow. I mean even just that's a symbol. I mean, Woodstock is the symbol of of that whole thing that on some level
The
we're
whole
all
thing.
downstream of in ways that I'm sure that I will continue to understand of my life is downstream of, right? So how did it go from how did you like what did you start practicing yoga with him? Were you a student and then he was
Well,
like,
I had, like I said, I read Autobiography of a Yogi, so that kind of gave me a little tiny pinpoint view into that world.
yeah.
Then my friend Kathy, who was a model, had met him, and she said, "Oh, you must come meet my Swami."
Right.
So I went with her, and he gave a talk, and I thought, he's talking about these realizations I had on acid. Like he's articulating a world that's very congruent with that. And I'd never met anybody like that. I'd met smart people and had theories and had a bunch to say. But he was an embodiment of a whole other level of consciousness.
Yeah, totally.
And so I
You
just
recognize that.
say that again.
You recognize that.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, I met him and he hugged me. I went up to him at the end of his talk and he hugged me and I could tell that he loved me. Wow. And like that he loved me and he accepted me. And so that was like a big deal for me. And so, yes, I was interested in yoga, but I was much more interested in him loving me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, got it.
In that connection, that heart connection, that like recognition. Oh, this person who I've never met before loves me just because I'm here.
Yeah. And that was the thing. That was the difference that made the difference according to your heart.
Yeah, it was all about my heart and our heart connection.
Yeah, totally. Now that makes a lot of sense to me, knowing you. It just does. I think, well, how it makes sense to me is, well, one is, it's interesting. You are, I think you've described yourself as a general, right? You also describe yourself as a classical Taurus. You're a bull, right? There is this quality where you make shit happen, and you make shit happen at levels that are unreasonable, right? In terms of leading courses and throwing parties and movements, and however, it seems to be very connected to this something or someone captures your heart.
Like if you love me, I'll make sure your life is great.
Yes. And that quality of your heart is one of the things that I think is so interesting about you and about being your friend, is that there's, because, you know, if I think about a bull and I think about a general, I don't necessarily like think like words like love and heart necessarily.
Mhm.
But for you, it's very connected to that. There's a deep, almost vulnerable fact about you and your heart that is so devotional in its essence, in my experience.
Yes, I mean, you are so right on, because if I look at what I produced in Landmark,
Yeah. Mhm.
I loved my manager.
Hmm.
I love my manager, Julie. She would say, look, do you think you could have 100 more people in your course? And I would say, yes, because I loved her and she wanted that. And I loved the person who invented all the stuff in the wisdom area, Brian.
Hmm.
I loved him because he thought I was just um,
Hmm.
great.
Yeah.
He thought I was just great, and
Yeah.
I'd do anything for him.
Right. Right. And like great at a level of, see, I'm not getting the sense it's like great in the sense that he gave you a reflection of yourself that you wanted. I'm also getting that sense with when you were talking about with the yogi. It's not like he hugged you and there was like like that he reflected something to you that you needed. It was more like it's something else. It was more like a transmission of some, like a, he loved you at the level of a being that was unconditional. Like, and there's something
Yes,
about,
there's the
yes,
unconditionality.
yeah,
However,
unconditionality
you
of it, right?
unconditionality in all of
Yeah,
those examples.
right.
Brian, Julie, Swami Satchidananda,
Yeah,
all what they and their deep appreciation of my quirks,
yeah,
like things other people were like, really,
yeah.
really, Joan? No, they were like, they thought they were adorable.
Yes, and so it's like it's interesting because I think when I'm like if I crawl inside of that, there's it's
It's kind of like how you are with me,
uh-huh,
where I'll tell you stuff
uh-huh,
that I think other people would uh, not want to embrace.
right,
Like, oh God, get a grip, or
right,
oh, you've had all these years of transformation and you still are like that. Bah. But like you think that's interesting
yeah, yeah,
rather than
totally.
icky.
Totally. Yeah, and it's something about, I think that one of the things I'm just getting about what as you're talking about it is that it's not like, and even unconditional love is tricky. It's a tricky, it doesn't quite say it because it it's not like he, Swami, the yoga guy hugged you. And it wasn't like he was looking at you and then noticing conditions upon which he accepted. It was more like he was looking at a place that had no conditions and he was unambivalent about how he felt about that, right? and then and then anything that you talk about afterwards is already inside of an unconditionality that I just it's interesting. I've never quite got it so clearly in relationship with you about what that must have been like to be in the gaze of that or to be to hugged in that way, because I mean, up until that point, everything that you've described has been just a like it's like life kind of. When I think about your history from before then, right? It's like a hall of mirrors. There's like everything has so much at stake, and there's nothing totally obvious of what you could do, and like impulses in you could ruin your family, and just all these iterations of reflections with no clear, like no clear rule book, but a lot at stake and a lot on the line. And then just knowing that just innately, like fanatically curious being that you are, which is the way that you love is you get interested in stuff, I've noticed, right? It's one of the way. And so I would just imagine that interest, of course you were interested in all the cool stuff, but that would compromise everything in your life, right? And then you had to go become opposite of that. And then your mom had a story about you of like, well, she's just, and so to meet somebody that was standing in the place that opened, that you got a taste of on LSD, right? And just lived there and then hugged you from there. That strikes me as a profound kind of DNA level experience.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I don't think I would have talked about it then like that.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of how go through life, how I've gone through life is, all right, well, okay, it wasn't that way yesterday, but okay, this is the way it is now.
Right. Yeah.
It isn't like, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa. It's like, oh, okay. And it's more pragmatic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And you, of course, so then you just start responding to what's in front of you.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And so that response was becoming his secretary.
Absolutely. And traveling with him and writing his biography.
Yeah.
Which is just something we cooked up together. Before that, he had said, I think we should do a Hatha yoga book. And so he would explain the positions and to me, and I would like sort it out and write it down. And then my friend Geeta Hanneman, who was this extraordinary documentary filmmaker who was also his devotee, photographed him in all these yoga positions. And it was one of the first coffee table size books on Hatha yoga. It was just spectacular.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Interesting. Interesting. And then and that was distinct from the biography.
Yeah, the biography was about a year later.
Oh, wow. So like lots of spending time with him.
No, I lived with him.
Yeah, you lived with him. And you wrote but that's a whole, so it's interesting. Like, so there's living with people, right? But then there's, I'm imagining living and then writing about who you're living with, right? That seems like a whole different level.
Well, what we would do is it was so clunky given technology now.
Yeah.
I would interview him. I'd say, so tell me what it was like growing up in Coimbatore.
Yeah.
And he would tell me, and we would record it on this portable tape recorder. Mm-hmm. And then I would transcribe it, pushing a button and typing and it was like
right.
So horrible. That part was horrible.
Right. Wow. And so you lived with him for how long?
2 years.
2 years. And then and then when were you introduced to Landmark? Was that after that or during that or?
I moved to California in 1970 and I gave birth to my daughter Daisy here.
Mhm.
And
Which is
uh,
your first child, right?
well, my first child was stillborn.
Mm-hmm.
She was born 2 years before. She was born in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and her name was Gabby,
Gabby. Okay.
Gabrielle,
Uh-huh.
and she was born dead.
Oh. Huh.
And that was
Yeah. What
a
was
big
that like?
deal. That
Yeah.
was horrible.
Huh.
That was just
Huh.
so unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was that, so just in terms of time, is that while you were living
I had
in,
moved out
okay.
of the Integral Institute. I was still being his corresponding secretary,
Yeah.
and then someone else took over as the person who attended to his, room and his food
Yeah.
and the travel and
Yeah. All of that. And
yeah,
so right as you were moving out, you were pregnant.
yeah. That's why I moved out.
Yeah. And
Uh,
and you were married.
yeah, it was Richie's daughter.
Uh-huh. Right. Wow. And so that, what was, I would imagine, like, God, yeah, what was that like? I mean, what how did you get through that?
Time,
Yeah. Yeah.
just time. I mean, people were so uneducated then about
Yeah.
how you approach someone who's grief stricken and lost a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
People said a lot of stupid shit.
Right. Right.
And I was in agony.
I bet you were. I bet you were. Yeah. Like you're in agony and without much of mu- well, I would imagine not much of a narrative to be able to hold the amount of agony.
No, I mean, I kept thinking I should get over it.
Yeah.
Like I'd say things to myself like, well, it's not like she ever lived.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course she lived. She lived inside of me
Hmm.
for 9 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had no frame of reference other than, oh, I'm in pain. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And is something wrong with me that I'm not over this and it's been a month?
Right. Wow. And also just not having had kids before. So
No,
not even knowing, God, what a, wow, wow. Just to try to imagine how one pieces that together, because I would imagine you have, now that you have kids, you can look back and go like, well, of course, this is probably, at least you could have explained it to yourself more,
yeah,
right? But the bonding
yeah,
that happens, I'm imagining, as as a woman that goes through the pregnancy is just so, I mean, it's just so, well, one of the things I've noticed about Brienne in our relationship, so there's this way where I'm like really philosophical and like, questioning the cosmic questions and all the stuff, and and it's interesting. Brienne is just kind of like, she's like, it's obvious to her, like there's a way where there's, I mean, she loves the fact that I do that, right? She wouldn't change me in a heartbeat. But there is this way where she could do that with me, but she could also she could cook dinner and somehow be as connected to that as my going to the edge of the cosmos, right? With it, that there's something so inside out, biologically obvious, like life. You're so identified with life, right? And there's a
yeah,
way where I'm imagining as a man, like it's very difficult for me to even comprehend what that would be like. But to the degree that I can, it's like, but here's the thing about it is I just would imagine going through all of that, right? And your whole body is oriented to have a future of being a second womb for another being,
absolutely.
right? And
Yeah,
so you go through all of that, and then the child dies, and there's no one that you know, but you have all of that. Your whole last 9 months has been in your being has been in preparation for that second womb, and then no one's there. Like, that's intense.
It's so intense. I mean, I even had milk, which had nowhere to go, which was just dripping out of my breasts, and I was just set up
Huh.
for having a child,
Huh.
and then there was just no child.
God. Wow. I've never talked to you about this.
No.
Yeah, I've never talked with you about this. This is I feel one, I'm just loving getting to know you more. I always love getting to know you more. But like also I'm just appreciating, I think, so like kind of updating my experience with you, right? Which is where we started to become friends, was right when Jerry died, right? And the grief that you were, again, trying to comprehend out of that experience, right? Which,
Yeah, but I had, I had you.
yeah,
You were holding me.
yeah,
I had more experience. I mean, I understood that I was just going to let whatever emotional winds blew through me, I was going to let that be.
yeah, yeah.
And I was, it was going to take as long as it was going to take. And
Right, totally. So you had wisdom, but
yeah,
like when how old were you when that happened?
24.
You're 24. Wow. 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 And so you went through all that grief, right? And you moved to California. Why did you move to California?
Was hippie Mecca.
Yeah. To be a hippie. Yeah. Yeah, to go be a hippie. And is that when you
I
got
was a hippie, but to be a hippie in New York was like to
Yeah.
be a second-class hippie.
Yeah.
San
Right.
Francisco
Was the first class hippie. Oh yeah.
was
Absolutely.
the shit,
Right. Right. And is that when you encountered Landmark?
Yeah, but 4 years later.
Okay, got
It
it.
was S. It was S then.
Right. Right. And then that was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
What happened?
Well, I had a lot of disdain for the S training and people's reports about the S training because I had lived with a real honest to goodness guru, teacher,
Right.
master.
Right.
This was this American guy,
Mm-hmm.
who had abandoned his wife and family and changed his name, and people's reports about it seemed far-fetched. But then Werner.
And this is when you moved to California. This was like late 60s,
Early 70s.
early 70s. Okay, got it.
But then Werner developed a relationship with Swami Muktananda, and good friends of mine lived in Piedmont, and they turned their home into his ashram. And Werner asked Swami Muktananda if he would go to Werner's centers and meet the people there, because Werner wanted his staff and participants to meet Swami Muktananda and have that as part of their experience. So Werner asked my friends if they wanted to do the S training because they were now working together on this tour. And they said yes, and I felt betrayed because we were all spiritual people.
Yeah, totally.
And that was like some Western bullshit. That's not Eastern philosophy.
Yes.
Which was where it was at, was Eastern philosophy. So they did the S training, and then they were like hot for me to do it. They loved it. They told me I would love it. I didn't believe them. I thought now they were part of his thing. But then my very, very best friend in the world, through them, did it. And that's what turned me.
Okay, got it.
I could not bear that she had something I didn't have.
Yeah, totally.
So then I did it. And Werner was the person who led my training.
Yeah.
And I was smitten by his authenticity, by his like ruthless fucking compassion, and the level of his authenticity and the way he could see right into people and be so straight with them, and at the same time be so compassionate without the trappings of what we consider compassion, any of the oozy, icky things.
Right.
No, he's just like a sword, like a samurai sword, cutting through people's bullshit. You know, it was like, wow.
Right. And that was a game changer. That was
a game changer because before I had done a couple of things. I had done this course called an Enlightenment Intensive, which is very intense. And when I did that, I had a full-blown, what I would call enlightenment experience, where everything fell away, like all of my preferences and every good and all duality kind of completely fell away. And I lived in that state for about 2 weeks, where I moved through the world without attachment to my own thoughts. And it was like I moved through the world and I was cloaked in ecstasy.
Wow.
But that happened for me again when I did the S training.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you're like, well, that one went really well.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
I'd like some more of that.
No doubt. You know, it's interesting as you're talking. It's so interesting because I just kind of caught sight of a broader time frame, you know, of in some ways, because I've been, as you know, I've been in these conversations with John Vervaeke and various people about how people are, like, he's conceptualizing it as the meaning crisis, and Jordan Hall's talking about it as the meta crisis of this basically place where, you know, secularism like takes hold in nihilism, right? And where we go from basically a religiously based Western culture to losing the ground of that, and that happening slowly through time, right? And as you're talking, I'm getting this sense of like the response to that, the response to the loss of that ground, right, are things that you were right inside of at the very beginning of, right, the whole 60s. And you were right at the first people on that wave. of responding to the, because there was this gap, right, on some level where the institutions were these basically Christian institutions, like not maybe explicitly, but all of the values that had come from Christianity, right? But yet it was, people were losing the Christian faith. So you
I
had
would
all
say
these
Judeo-Christianity.
Judeo-Christianity, yeah. And this is an
Yeah.
overgeneralization big time. And as people were experiencing, one way you could look at it is people were experiencing the loss of that meaningfulness of the ground, right? You start to look at the response to that, right? And so you were on two very, very, some of the first waves of the response to the meaning crisis, to the meta crisis. And we're witnessing that. I was just kind of getting a sense of that, right? And here we are having a conversation about it from inside of it.
Yeah.
This is amazing. This is amazing. Interesting. You know, we've been going for about 2 hours. How are you doing?
I knew it was a lot. I'm good. I'm a little hot
Yeah.
because the sun has gotten higher.
Yeah. Because I can break this up. But I'm actually kind of getting a sense of, how about if we stop now?
Okay.
And then let's just do another one.
Yeah, this is fun.
This is a lot of fun.
What I love about it is it's giving meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It gives a lot of meaning to
Mm-hmm.
to the narrative, you know. I mean, narrative itself is meaning, right? But
Yeah.
this gives some meta meaning,
Yeah.
to the unfoldment of my life. So
Yeah.
it's so much fun for me because all I have to do is tell my version of the truth.
Totally. And it happens to be that your version of the truth touches on so many tissues that connect so many horizons, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I've known that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's good to have that validated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's really good
Totally.
to have that validated
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
And you're so curious. You ask these great questions.
Uh-huh. Totally. Yeah. Well, it's so pertinent. It's so pertinent to everything that I do and I'm about, for sure. But it's also kind
Yeah.
of like, I'm just really aware of, like, oh, so many things that I'm standing on and that I start from to then be interested in, and to circling and all that stuff. I'm talking to the person that was influential and was a witness to the tissues of what made that thing that I'm standing on, right? And so there's a quality of my interest is actually, it's like tapping back into itself, into the background of, and I'm learning about it, and then we're having this dialogue around it.
Yeah, and I like that
Yes.
I like that it's fun for you too.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is great. Yeah, this is great. And of course, there's the other level where I'm just like, oh my God, I didn't know about that. Like, I didn't. And so there's another part of it too, where it's not like it's changing it's not like I'm finding out that you're somebody else. It's not that at all. It's actually, it's animating more of, like, I've had a number of times, especially when you talked about, right, having the stillborn, right? Like, I just watched myself, kind of like Sixth Sense, that movie, The Sixth Sense, of like, right, you know, he's dead through the whole movie and you don't know it, no one knows it, and then right at the end he realizes out of the corner of his eye that he's dead, and then everyone starts realizing it, and then it goes to the beginning of the movie and shows scene after scene after scene, and you realize it was obvious the whole time, but concealed, right? Like some of that, I'm like, oh, whoa, in this way that I'm sure I'm going to be thinking about when we're done here, right? And is percolating of like, oh yeah, so many different parts of you are just more animate or more meaningful to me or more salient in ways that make a lot of sense. So you seem even more both mysterious and coherent. And the thing
Nice.
also the thing about like you talking about that moment, the moment when he hugged you, the Swami hugged you, and that was the moment where your heart went, and I'm like, because I've seen that in you. I've seen that and experienced that with you, and I've watched worlds be moved when that happens, right? And so that's something that I'm on some level I deeply understand about you, and am constantly in some way in relationship with you as your friend to that. So like to kind of get this sense of that, and then and then make sense of it. There's this hermeneutic circles that are going on, right? Of unfolding meaning that are happening right in this conversation. So I'm glad we're filming it.
Wouldn't it be horrible if we didn't record it?
Oh my God.
And we had this awesome conversation,
Yes.
and it was like,
yes.
Did you hit the button? Oh no, did you?
Yes, I hit the button, and I have done that before, believe me.
No, I see. It's doing
Yes.
doing that pulsing thing.
Yes. So this seems like a good place chronologically to kind of leave it off, right?
Yes, let's.
Right with Warner, which is a whole world. And let's just kind of like let the conversation sink in, and like next week or something like that, we can get back on. And
that would be so great.
And this all of it started with, you were like, yeah, what is that hotness thing?
Yeah. That's a really good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is that hotness thing?
Right. And this is where we are so far in that ride.
Yeah. All right. I love you
so
a
much.
lot.
Yes. Love
Have
you too,
an
Joan.
awesome day.
Bye.
Bye.